Dan Aykroyd was on Saturday Night Live for its very first season.
I was in this environment of really creative, smart, stimulating people.
In this conversation, Dan will reveal the inspiration behind some of SNL's most iconic sketches.
She took a whole fish and she put it in the blender and hit the button. I said, Aunt Helen, it's got eyes and bones. And she's, oh, it's a bouillabaisse. It's fine.
Well, I think I'm going to go to sleep now. Bon appetit.
You'll hear how Dan met his most important collaborator, John Belushi.
And the door opened, and in a gust of wind and blizzard, Belushi appears as a silhouette.
And why they decided to join forces to create a comedy blues band.
We sort of came up with the Blues Brothers that night, actually. Well, we should start a band. And Howard Shore said, well, call it the Blues Brothers.
You'll also hear how Dan came up with the idea for Ghostbusters.
And I'm just clicking with everybody, Ivan and Billy and everybody, on we're going to do an old-time ghost comedy, but with a little science thrown in there.
And if you stay to the very end, you'll find out why Dan is done with acting.
It would have to be a Spielberg call to really get me out the door for acting now.
So without further ado, here's my conversation with the legendary Dan Aykroyd. Dan, I know that you were born and raised in Ottawa, and your dad worked for the government. He actually was an advisor to Pierre Trudeau and had a pretty big job, right? He oversaw quite a significant department in the Canadian government.
Well, he ended up as Assistant Deputy Minister of Transport, and he was at the head of the Transport Development Agency, and he sold Canadian icebreakers to Chinese and Korean buyers. He traveled the world doing that. But he wrote the orders in council for two ministries when he was a Privy Council officer with Trudeau's cabinet there, an advisor. He wrote the orders in council to two ministries that administered subjects that no one was even thinking about at that time or had even heard of. And one of them was the Ministry of Urban Affairs. Like, Canada's growing. There's going to be cities. We have to have some control. We have to have some kind of, government oversight here to make sure that the money that the federal government gives to municipalities is spent well. So that's one ministry that he wrote the orders in council for that became law. And the other one was a word that people weren't really throwing around at that time: the environment. He wrote the orders in council for the Ministry of the Environment. And at the time, the environment was like your neighborhood, your block. And it wasn't until, interests that were green in terms of their science and research and backgrounds began to say, hey, if we don't govern this or regulate this, we're going to have a toxic cesspool for country.
Yeah.
So, but moreover, my dad had a great sense of humor, and so did my mom. And I had kind of an idyllic upbringing up there in Ottawa, which is a beautiful city. And I grew up in Hull on the Quebec side, so I had the mix of both. I'm very Canadian guy. I was born on July 1. That's Canada Day. My grandfather on my maternal side was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police Staff Sergeant, a Mountie. And my mother was French-Canadian. My dad was a High Anglican English WASP. So kind of a great mix of all of the best of Canada and a vintage Canadian year for men.
He was, I'm curious because as a High Anglican WASP, he was also, from what I gather, a spiritualist. He used somebody who, and I guess this was a tradition in your family. And maybe you should explain what that means, I guess.
Well, it's a religion, actually, and it was founded in the 1800s, as an alternative to strict Christian fundamentalism, I guess. And if you go up to Chautauqua, New York, a lovely place.
Yes.
There's a little village called Lilydale with practicing seance and trance medium channelers. And Lilydale was a community that in the 1800s embraced runaway slaves, embraced suffragettes. You talk about a woke community. This was where woke was born. In Lilydale, and that by woke I mean the good things, not the proselytizing about woke, but the promotion of tolerance and understanding, which is at the root of this word, I believe, and this concept. So Lilydale was the foundation town of the spiritualist movement, and so accepting to all, same gender preference accepted, suffragettes accepted, runaway slaves accepted, racial diversity accepted, and also a firm belief, and this is the family religion. In the survival of the soul in the afterlife, and not only the survival of the soul, but the survival of a consciousness. So the soul goes on, and then also consciousness can reach back and touch us here in this dimension. This is what we spiritualists believe, is that the soul doesn't die, and nor does the consciousness die, and it can be summoned back, and it can be transmuted sometimes through a good chance, a trans-channel medium. And that's the way most people reach the loved ones who've gone before. So that's my religion. That's spiritualism. My dad was a fundamentalist Christian, Knox Presbyterian preacher, in fact, in his off time. And my mom was a Roman Catholic, and I was raised Catholic. I was an altar boy from age 5. I went to a seminary, St. Pius X Minor Preparatory Seminary for boys.
Yeah.
And so I had, they said, do you want to be a priest? And my answer to this, when he said, do you think you have the vocation, Dan? Would you like to join us here in this vocation and come into the seminary and look at the priesthood as a career? And this is my answer. Yes, I would, because my parents really wanted me to go to that. But I've embraced spiritualism, as my great-grandfather Sam Aykroyd did, who started the whole thing, and my dad. And I believe that the soul of the other side, a loved one, can actually transmogrify and can actually materialize matter in this dimension. And I have a few experiences where matter was materialized from the other side, and I'm not making that up. I mean, this is just a fact in my life, is that the interest has always been there. And that's, of course, where Ghostbusters came from, because my great-grandfather.
Right.
Yeah. And when you ask about Ramis, when I went to write with Ramis, I wrote the first draft and brought it to Ivan.
Wait, let me ask about that in a sec. I want to just, because I've got questions before we get there, and I want to ask about more about spiritualism when we talk about Ghostbusters. But from what I gather, I mean, you described your dad as this really a kind and sort of just a very generous person. He treated everybody who worked under him
thousands of people. Yeah,
he had a big job, and so and by the way, as a kid, I mean, he was working for Trudeau, and Trudeau was this kind of glamorous. He was sort of like the first glamorous Canadian world leader, like in that sense, right? I mean, do you remember? Like, did you see him? Did your dad? Was he friends with him? Were you around that world as a kid?
I wouldn't say that the PCOs and cabinet staff were friends, but of course he was around him all the time. He briefed him many times. I've got trunks of letters to him in a formal context, and I wouldn't call Dad glamorous. I don't think too much of the glamour came, but he certainly had his own style. Yeah. And my mom worked for the government too. She had really an interesting job in World War II. She was attached to the aircraft production group of the Ministry of Munitions and Supply, and she worked on the fuselages for Hurricane fighter planes. She was managing that office as an executive secretary, and she was able to tell airplane profiles from just from those charts they put on the ceiling. She had that knowledge. She was really interesting, and worked right through. Almost to the end of her life, she was still typing and writing and working for people. Yeah.
How did you get in as a kid? How did you sort of kind of veer towards comedy and comedic acting? Because I think you started already 14, 15 years old as maybe a class clown or acting in school plays. Like, how did it start?
Well, I tell you what, in grade 3. In grade 3 now, this is how show business exploits people. Here I am, a kid in grade 3. And the principals of the school that I went to, Our Lady of the Annunciation School in Hull, Quebec, were putting on a review, like a show, in the church basement. So they recruited me to sing McNamara's band. And, Tennessee, Hennessy, tootled the flute, and the music was something grand, with the Irish accent and everything, if you want to know.
Right.
So here I am, a 3-year-old kid. Now, you're going to do this. It's like there's no choice. I have to do this. I have to learn the song, do the accent, do the jig, the whole thing. You've been picked. So, all right, I'll go out and sing McNamara's band. And I'm not loving this at all. This is like, whoa, what an ordeal. So I go out and I go on the stage at the church, packed house, of course, enforced, mandatory packed house for the raffle, for the tickets and the bazaar and all that. And I sang it to like playback. And people began to applaud. And here's me not loving this experience at all, but them loving me doing this. So I thought, well, geez, maybe there's something to this. It's exploitative and it's horrible. These principles, like producers exploiting the actor, but maybe there's some satisfaction in it because the reaction was quite positive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then after that, my friends took me out the back door to a funeral home where 7 bodies were laid out. Who had died in a car crash. And this was the trauma of that day when I sang McNamara's band. Here I go from the elation of singing McNamara's band and getting, and then my friends, come and see something neat. That's nothing. Come and see something. And we go across, and there's a family of 7 laid out in coffins. And so I go from exhilaration of this great reception to a complete, oh boy, mortality. It's right around the corner.
I'm curious. I mean, did you at what age did you know? Because you went to college, right? But at what age did you think I really want to be an actor? This is what I want to do. Was it already in your teens?
Well, so I was reluctly pulled into doing that, but I enjoyed that, singing that song, and then in high school, I met a woman, Valerie Bromfield was her name. She's in the movie that I directed, Nothing But Trouble, or Vulcanvania. She plays the female cop. She was a major influence in my life. She was a sketch comedian, writer. And I was studying criminology at the time. She said, no, you're not going to be a prison guard. You're going to come and work with me and do comedy. So there in my late teens, I guess, she kind of nudged me into doing stuff. I'd done a couple of plays in high school. Really, again, just to serve the community, not really because I was passionate about it. Although we did do a neat version of Murder in the Cathedral, Beckett's demise. That was really a neat piece that we did because we had a great director there in high school. So I would say with Valerie as a student alongside me, urging me to write comedy and perform and fulfill that gift, I guess you could say. And then Brady Long, my high school teacher at St. Pat's there in Ottawa, who put on really interesting plays and sketches and reviews and saved me. He saved me from being expelled a couple of times. So it was really that high school teacher, Brady, and my fellow student who encouraged me to kind of do voices and write stuff and try out structure of comedy in these sketches that we did. We had a TV show, Valerie and I, very early on cable in Ottawa, and that was when you had your television show came in a box that was 2 inches wide with a handle on it. That's the old 2-inch videotape. So we had a great show that was called Change for a Quarter. It was 15 minutes long. Change for a quarter, and we played our sketches to 2 robot cameras basically, and then when it came time to come see Lorne Michaels in Toronto to audition for CBC, we had that tape that we could bring in and show him
because he was already making a show. I want to before I ask you about that, I wonder how you were in plays, right, in high school, but how did you discover that comedy really was the direction that you were headed into, not dramatic acting, for example, or Shakespeare, or whatever it might be? I mean, because presumably you were doing that as well, but how did you gravitate towards comedy?
Well, I think that the biochemical electromagnetic benefits of laughter are it's indisputable. What laughter does to and for people, whether you're laughing yourself or making people laugh, and the healing medical benefits of it are are evident all over the world. So when I found, I guess, that some of the stuff I was writing or characters I was doing, teachers, doing impressions of teachers, that was a big one. You do an impression of a teacher and the class is laughing. The teacher's not there, of course, but you're doing 3 minutes before he comes in, and they're laughing, and you go, yeah, I mean, that made me feel good. You know, the endorphins are flowing there. So I think it's just a really a biological thing. It's very attractive to laugh and to be laughed at in the proper context. I thought, well, if this works, I can maybe pursue it, and I did with Valerie when we did go to Toronto. And then subsequently with Second City, she joined as well with me.
That was also
years
in
later,
Toronto.
A couple of years later, yeah.
I want to just kind of digress for a moment and talk about blues, because blues is not like a shtick, or it's not like a sketch comedy thing. Like, you obviously we'll talk about Blues Brothers, but blues is a fundamental part of your life, and it started at a very early age. Tell me how a kid in Ottawa got into blues. Like, all your friends are probably listening to rock and roll. I mean, you grew up in, you kind of were a teenager in the 60s. And so, I'm assuming that most of your friends were listening to rock and roll. And here you were, this kind of oddball listening to blues. How did that happen?
Well, yeah, it was Grand Funk, heavy metal, Cream, of course, and the Stones. But, anybody back then who knew those bands knew that their inspiration originated in blues music.
Yeah.
I think it all comes down to a nightclub operator named Harvey Glatt, and he ran a club called Le Hibou, and in French that means an owl. And he ran it on Sussex Boulevard, right down the street from the Prime Minister's residence, a little club there in an old limestone building.
In Ottawa.
So he booked all of the great blues artists of the time. I saw them all. I saw Otis Spann, S.P. Leary, Charlie Musselwhite, Butterfield.
But who got you into that? How did you even walk into the door?
Trading records with a couple of friends of mine, going to the record store and just digging West Side Soul, South Side Soul, digging the Chicago sound, hearing bands around town that were playing blues in Ottawa, and then mainly it was the Hibou, being able to go there and see these great artists. Howlin' Wolf, I saw him a dozen times. Muddy Waters, I got on the drum kit behind him.
You actually got to jam with him as
tiny. It was only lasted a minute because S.P. Leary shooed me off. But he didn't come to the drum stand, and Muddy was wanted to start the set. He looked around, his drummer wasn't there. Is there a drummer in the house? Drummer in the house? Yeah, I went like this, and then we started.
You got up on stage,
and he said, "Boy, keep that beat going, boy. You make Muddy feel good." And now that's a true story. I saw them all, man. Oh man, just the Ice Picker, Albert Collins, Albert King. They all came to Le Hibou. So for sure, 3-4 nights a week, I'd be out, heading out in the snow or wind or autumn weather, heat, springtime, summer, autumn, winter. He had this place rocking, man, and I would go maybe 2-3 nights a week, and it truly was an all seasons venue. He just had a flow. It was nonstop of the greatest blues talent ever. So I'd have to thank him and that little club for my exposure and just loving these artists.
And did you teach yourself guitar and harmonica?
Oh, I don't play guitar.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite instruments. My favorite instrument of all, like to hear and just to enjoy, is the Hammond B3 organ. And I've had some great Hammond B3 players. Of course, Paul Schaefer. So just harmonica, and I'm still learning on that thing. There's so much more to learn, but it's amplification is fun. It's electric amplified harp is fun. I've learned. I played with some of the best. I've jammed with Musselwhite, and I've jammed with Butterfield, and I've jammed with Jimmy Wood, who's in my band now. So I'm always learning on that thing, and it teach you little tricks on how to tune the amp. John Popper taught me a few things.
Wow.
So always learning on that. And it's a versatile little sucker, and it works really well for the shows that we're doing with with Jimmy Belushi, John's brother. We have an active concert touring.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's the Sacred Hearts and with the Texicali horns, and the blood legacy, descendant of the Khans of Baluchistan and the kings of Albania, Mr. James Belushi.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep you back in the late '60s before we get to today, and I know that you have at times talked about as a kid, you struggled with, I think, Tourette syndrome as a kid, right?
Well, that's a self-diagnosis. I've never heard a doctor say that. I've never heard a doctor say that. I did go to a psychologist for a while. My parents felt it was best to send me there, but that's sort of me kind of guessing and thinking, well, why do I do these certain things? Why do I do certain vocalizations? Is it a touch of Asperger's? It's really, I've never had a professional diagnosis or anybody tell me that, but I've just seen enough people and I read enough about it that there might be a little touch there. Maybe
a bit, because you've talked about Asperger's too, that maybe you suspect that there's a bit of that you have a bit of it.
Well, it's just, again, self-diagnosis. I can't say with any kind of authority, because I'm not a medical, but I just behavior and maybe I might have a little touch of that, and they're both linked. They're on on the spectrum, as they say. Those two conditions. Yeah.
Dan, I'm curious. You dropped out of Carleton University and you go to Toronto and you team up with your friend Valerie Bromfield to create like a comedy duo. And I read that you were really inspired by Mike Nichols and Elaine May. And I wonder, first of all, what did your parents think about this? I mean, you were moving to Toronto to become a stand-up comedy actor. Were they nervous? Were they worried? Or were they supportive?
Well, primarily at Second City, we were scene players, not so much stand-up, although we had great monologists that came through there and went on to great careers doing that. But we were mainly scene players, and so it was this. We were perfectly equipped with Valerie and I, what we'd been doing with all the things we've been writing, the sketches and characters. My dad was 100% behind it, and in fact was a frequent visitor at the 505 Club, which was the speakeasy we started after we joined Second City, right there on Queen Street, 505 Queen Street on the streetcar line. We opened it at 1 o'clock because liquor laws closed everything down in Ontario at 1, so we'd be open from 1 to 4. And my dad came in and saw Second City shows, and he was a big fan of what I was doing, and he came to the 505 a lot. My mother wanted me to take the more traditional path, finish the education and that, but in the end, she kind of skeptically accepted what I chose to do. And then, of course, when I did Driving Miss Daisy, then that validated everything I'd been doing. She liked that one.
When you Second City obviously started in Chicago, and then you were brought into the Toronto kind of like chapter of it, and you did that. This is so you're like 20 years old doing that, and I think around this time, 73, you also met John Belushi for the first time. Do you remember?
Yeah, it was 70. Would have been 73, 74. Around 73, it must have been. Yeah. He had come up to Toronto to recruit for the National Lampoon Radio Hour, and he had heard about Gilda, and he thought, I'd like to grab her.
She was also in Second City in Toronto with you.
Yeah, John Candy.
Gilda Radner.
Yeah, Eugene Levy, John Candy, Gilda Radner, Valerie Bromfield, Jerry Salzberg, Brian Doyle Murray, our teacher, Bill Murray's brother, was in the cast. Joe Flaherty was also in that first cast when we were in Toronto as teacher, instructors, and cast members. And Catherine O'Hara later joined. So, right there, that Toronto company. And then Marty, of course, later came in, and so many other wonderful artists came through there.
So John Belushi came there.
We were all sort of, reputations were spreading about this cast in Toronto, and he heard about Gilda. And so he came up to recruit, and he ended up getting her, too. And I met him on a windy, wintry February night. He was we were backstage. We'd finished the set, and we were sitting in the pit there in the back, and the door opened right directly to the alley behind the old firehouse where we were. And the door opened, and in a gust of wind, when blizzard, Belushi appears as a silhouette, wide, but like the Tasmanian devil, that kind of silhouette, big Tasmanian, wide at the shoulders, down right to a little point. He looked like a huge Tasmanian devil. He had a Lee J. Cobb, like drive-by-night, octagonal cap on, a white scarf, and a cardigan sweater and sneakers and a pack of butts in his hand. He was completely underdressed for the Canadian winter. And there he came in like a demigod. He did the set with us. We hung. We went back to the 505, and there was a record playing straight up, Downchild Blues Band. And John goes, "Oh, that's pretty good music. That's it. Who is this? Oh, it's just a local blues band. Oh, blues, huh? Blues. Yeah, blues, John. You're from Chicago. What do you mean? You know the blues. Well, I'm into Zepp and heavy metal and
Yeah.
What other? He liked the crunch bands, the metal bands, and later he loved punk, of course. And by the time I got to that night, we sort of came up with the Blues Brothers that night, actually. Well, we should start a band. And Howard Shore said, well, call it the Blues Brothers.
I mean, you kind of introduced him to blues music.
Well, reintroduced. He'd seen them all. He'd been to the Checkerboard Lounge. John knew the Chicago blues scene. He just had veered off. And so he veered back from heavy metal. By the time I got to New York to start SNL, he had 300 records all piled up that he really researched it and began to pick songs to do. And so even before we went on the show, we came up with the name, the suits, the idea, the background, the backstory. And one of our first bands that backed us up was Willie Nelson and Mickey Raphael at the Lone Star Cafe on Fifth Avenue. John had met Willie, I think, through Lampoon and knew Willie and somehow knew Willie and said, we've got this, we got these songs we've practiced. Can we borrow your band? And Willie said, sure. And so we ended up doing at the Lone Star Cafe. We did two or three nights doing 5 songs with Willie backing us up and Mickey Raphael on the harp. And yeah, it was beautiful.
What was it about John Belushi that you found an instant connection? I mean, obviously there's blues, but what was it about him that you just clicked with?
Well, he was, I was a non-sports-minded Canadian kind of nerd, and he was an Illinois alpha male, all-American, all-state football. I think he was a fullback, and very very American and oriented towards great American traditions, the Cubs, Chicago, high school sweetheart, Judy, all of that. And I kind of came from another world. We both came from different worlds, and each one's world fascinated the other. He was fascinated at how I should come out of this background of the bureaucrat's son from Ottawa, and and I was fascinated with how he came from the hardworking restaurant family that he lived in, and where his and just the sources of our humor were different, and it was different worlds. So I think we were very interested in each other.
You meet in 1973, and in 1974, you and John Belushi would become cast members on this new show, Saturday Night Live. I think you were the youngest cast member at the time. You were
the show started in September 1975. Yeah.
So you were 22, 23.
23.
Mm-hmm. 23, and I mean, obviously now you look back on it as just a legendary group of people. Was it clear to you? I mean, I know originally you were hired as a writer, right?
I was.
Was it clear to you that he was going to be, from the get-go, that he was going to be a really important collaborator to you, for you?
Yeah, because we'd already concocted the Blues Brothers, and I knew that, and we knew that was something that would be a lot of fun, and had to keep kind of quiet because Lorne wasn't, other than Franken and Davis, he wasn't hiring teams, and he hired John first, and then sort of Gilda and Franken and Davis kind of talked Lorne into hiring me, even though I'd worked with Lorne before. He just saw that John and I had already put something together. I think he was a little afraid of that. So we had to keep that kind of quiet until that first appearance in front of the audience for the warm-up, and then the reaction was so good, and Lorne saw its merits and all that. But I didn't know that John was going to... I didn't know how much we were going to do. I knew we would do that, but not a movie. I didn't know. I wasn't even dreaming of a movie then. I mean...
There's a lot of lore around. There's been a lot of documentaries and even books written about those early years of Saturday Night Live. You were there for 4 years, and tell me about what you remember about that time. I mean, there's stories about heavy drinking and drugs, but also incredible creativity. I mean, just amazing burst of creativity. First of all, do you remember at the time? Do you remember it being easy to work with everybody else, or was it a difficult time in your life?
Well, the only difficult part of it was the pressure of live television and getting it right, and making sure that the crew card guys weren't overworked, because they used to get changes at the last minute and have to do them, and then the show's coming, and I could see the pressure they were on. That was the only negative time I ever had there was seeing how difficult it was for them to keep up, and then having to step up and put my boot through the wall into Lorne's office to get some attention for those guys. That was the only really negative vibe I ever felt. Everybody else, I loved working with everyone else. There was no problem for me. I was so privileged and happy to be there when there's an incredible group, all of whom I loved severally and mutually and individually. And I wasn't resentful or jealous of anybody else, or some might have been within there. I'm not sure, those rivalries, but I was working so hard, I didn't have time for any of that. Writing and performing and filling content.
I spent some time looking at many of your sketches during that period, and what's remarkable is, like, whether it's Julia Child or Jimmy Carter or a Ron Popeil type television salesperson, there's this incredible rapid fire complexity to your delivery, and I'm in awe, because you mentioned the cue cards people, and I was looking at a sketch where you're Jimmy Carter, taking in live calls from the public, and some woman calls in and she says, there's a problem. I'm a mail sorter. There's a problem with this electric mail sorter, to the president. And you're Jimmy Carter. And you say, oh, all you do is you take this part and that part, and it's very technical. It's a very technical answer, and I'm in awe just watching you perform this, because I don't know. Do you remember how you were able to do that? Did it just come naturally, or did it require a lot of practice to be able to deliver that rapid fire humor?
Well, certainly reading it. When you read something, you can do it much quicker than if you're just memorizing.
Yeah.
But that was so well written, that piece. I think I talked a kid down off acid, and Carter talks a kid down off acid. And Jimmy Carter was a lovely impression to do, because that soft Georgia accent, and that he was a thinking man and a nuclear physicist, and he had certain things in his facial and vocal delivery that were very very easy to do with the teeth that I had and the wig. So hiding in there, I guess I was able to sell the impression, and the writing and the fact that it was right there on the cards to read always contributes to the speed. Now, if something's badly written, you can't do it fast. But if it's well written, as that piece was by, I think, Zwei Bell might have worked on that, and me, and maybe Franken and Davis too. I forget, man. I don't know. I forget. I got to read the books.
Yeah. No. It's, of course you can't remember the details of that. It happened a long time ago. But what do you remember about your comedic writing? I mean, was it a struggle for you? Did it presumably got easier, but still, was it hard for you? Did you for some people, even novelists, just writing a page is like bleeding. It's very, very hard, and 90% of it's thrown away, and you get whatever the 10% left is the page. How was it? How was writing comedy sketches for you? Was it hard?
Not really, because I was in this environment of really creative, smart, stimulating people. And once I got the word that, okay, you go ahead and write something. You can write it, be in it, and produce it. That this license had been granted to me. I ran with it. Sure, okay, all right. Let's work on a piece with Zweibel, work on a piece with Marilyn Miller, work on a piece with Franken and Davis. Let them try something. If they want me to be an actor in there, I'll do it, or originate something for myself, a character. Work with Lorraine, sit there with Davis, and reminisce about our trip to Tahiti and the guy we met there, E-Buzz Mainway, and let's do E-Buzz. Let's do that. So it was a beautiful environment and very free flowing. So not difficult at all. Not like trying to figure out the endings to movies as I went on to write as a screenwriter. That endings are tough. Endings were tough with sketches too, but I think we nailed most of them. We nailed most of them, yeah.
I'm reluctant to ask, who was your favorite, but I'm not going to ask that because I hate getting that question about people I've interviewed. But when you think about the characters you did, Julia Child and all the impressions you did, Richard Nixon and Rod Serling, so many, Tom Snyder, Coneheads. I mean, all the characters, wild and crazy guys. What do you feel most proud of all the sketches that you did?
Well, like favorite character or favorite?
Yeah, or ones that you really just felt really you nailed it. You really got it right.
Well, there were. I mean, I think if you looked at all the sketches, I'd say 75% of them we nailed, and then maybe there were 25% that didn't quite land rightly. But I would say most of the stuff worked, and you look at individual pieces, and I can't think of one that right now that didn't work. I can think of ones that did, and I'd say about 75%. Now, as far as like a favorite character, Conehead. Yeah, that because I really relate to that being.
Because your character was a little bit eccentric and a little bit.
And I'm an alien,
Yeah.
I just and that was writing with Davis. You see, that was the joyous part of that was writing with Davis, which was wonderful, and then working with Downey. Yeah, I would say 75% of the sketches made it work. I'm trying to think of a turkey in there. Dave Mabel's Danger Probe, maybe. Dave Mabel's Danger Probe didn't quite work.
Did you ever encounter Julia Child while she was alive?
No, but my mother's sister, Helen Gougeon, Gougeon, was kind of the Julia Child of Canada. She had a show called La Belle Cuisine de Hélène Gougeon. She had a store. She had a radio show. She was on television. She was one of the first to bring the Cuisinart into Canada. I think she was the first importer. And she was friends with Julia Child. And so she knew her, and they had met at various functions and that. So Helen was really the Julia Child of Canada. And one afternoon, I was 13 years old, and I was at her beautiful house on the river near Montreal. And she was making a soup, and she took a whole fish and she put it in the blender and hit the button. I said, Aunt Helen, it's got eyes and bones. And she said, it's a bouillabaisse. It's fine. It's a bouillabaisse. It's supposed to be like that. Eyes, bones, tail, everything. And so that is, and 10 years later, that was the Basomatic, That's directly from her kitchen. Yeah.
You put a bass into a blender.
Yeah, because I'd seen my aunt do it. I said, Aunt Helen, what about the bones, the eyes, the tail? Oh, no, the lips. No, it's a bouillabaisse. It's supposed to be. Yeah, okay.
It's one of the best. It's one of the funniest sketches I think I've ever seen you do. I want to ask you about the Blues Brothers because you mentioned that you and John Belushi already really kind of sketched this out in '73. It debuted in 1976 on the show, but how did so for a few years you must have been talking about it and developing it. And tell me what you remember about like working out what it was with him. Did you have a backstory already? Was it just like, hey, let's just be these blues singers in a band? Like, what were you guys talking about it being?
Well, it was we researched the music really well. We had a couple of years to research the music and pick the song before we went on SNL. And then we jammed with Duke Robillard, Roomful of Blues. And of course, that wasn't going to work. Duke and John, that wouldn't have worked. And then we worked with Willie Nelson, and we started to jam around town. I kept up my modest proficiency on the harp. John had, of course, done Joe Cocker, so he was a very good vocalist and had the rock performer in him. And so we came up with the look. Like what? Well, we love this album cover of John Lee Hooker, House of the Blues, where he's got the fedora and the shades, and that's the look. That's the look. And then the suits are from Lenny Bruce. Trying to look straight. Yep. You're a junkie. You're trying to pass with the straights. So you put on a suit. You look like the IRS. And of course, we reference in the movie Hasidic diamond merchants, IRS agents, men in black. So that was where it's a nod to those great old blues men that wore just black and white, black suit, black tie. As Howlin' Wolf always wore black slacks and a white shirt, and big shoes, big like 15s, I think. And so it started with that, the love of the music, the respect, the veneration for the music, wanting this music to come alive in a different way through our interpretation, which was building on the ludic, the ridiculous. If you look at all of these great dance bands with wonderful lead players, it's about comedy. Cab Calloway, Jimmy Lunsford, Kay Kaiser. Mononee Harris. His songs were hilarious, and they were antic performers. So here we figure we can be these antic performers, and we can do this, and the only way to pull it off is to have a super band behind us. And so we began to think about who that might be. Paul Schaefer's working with us on selecting songs. We're practicing. We bring in the horn section from SNL. They do that gig with Willie. And Tom Malone says, well, you should get Steve Cropper and Duck Dunn. And yeah, sure. Like, Otis Redding's guitar players are going to join the Blues Brothers. He said, no, you guys are venerating this music. They'd be fantastic. They would get what you're doing. They would see, that you're frontmen, that you're not claiming to be real, genuine blues artists. You're out there just to sing the African-American songbook, celebrate it, and do it in the way that it was done in the 30s, 40s, and 50s with a comic edge in front of it. So then we hire Otis Redding's guitar players. We've got the horns. We've got Al Rubin and Tom Malone and Lou Marini, Schaefer on keyboards. And we wanted to get someone who was representative of the Chicago blues scene. So we saw James Cotton one night down up in Columbus Avenue there in Manhattan. And there was this beautiful black man there with a hat on, mustache, pumped arms, T-shirt, with the arms pumped out, just playing spectacular lead and rhythm guitar, and that was Matt Murphy. And he understood what we were doing, and that's really how it happened. And it happened because all of these really great professional musicians understood where we were coming from. It was, it's about humor. It's not a joke, but it's about humor. And it's not us trying to go out there and represent ourselves as, the genuine blues artists who came up through hard times. No, we're there to have fun, but also to celebrate the music and celebrate our players behind us and generally give the audiences a good time. And we're still doing it. I got to, I had to cancel a gig because of the strike, but we would have been out there playing a couple of weeks ago.
And this really landed with SNL audiences. Like you debuted it in 1976 as part of a sketch, right? And as you say, like it wasn't a joke. It was supposed to be funny, but also it was very much really a blues band. Like you were. So it's so interesting how it kind of didn't really necessarily fit into the SNL kind of universe, because it wasn't a sketch comedy on its own necessarily, but it was also very much part of very much about the music. So how did you sell that to Lorne Michaels? How did you get him to say, yeah, sure, go sing blues on stage?
Well, the audience reaction when we did that first warm up, we warmed the audience up off camera, and so I think I can probably imagine Lorne going, there might be something there. Yeah. And then he, of course, after that, he encouraged it and loved it and was a cheerleader for us and helped in a lot of things, pointing us the right way to Atlantic Records and all that.
You released a record, Briefcase Full of Blues, still one of the best-selling blues records of all time.
Best-selling records of about 4.5 million copies, and to date even more.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, that's again because of the superiority of the backup band and also the selection of the material and the fact that it wasn't just a standard, blues record. We had a lot of R&B on there, and we were a Memphis, Chicago fusion band. So we when we covered Soul Man, we opened up a whole avenue to do R&B as well. So we did Expressway to Your Heart. We did Who's Making Love, the Johnny Taylor tune. Yeah. So really the breadth, and in fact in all the records we did 6 of them, 7, I guess if you count the compilations. All the songs are different and obscure and fun, like Shake a Tail Feather from the movie. That wasn't a Ray Charles song, but we felt we wanted that's what captured for us what that dance number could be. That beat, the rhythm of it, the dips, the roller coaster feel of that song. And I forget who wrote that. Philadelphia songwriters, I believe they were. But Ray Charles did it, man. He said, I'll do that. And he did a great version of that song. Just a great version. Yeah. So all that was the variation of the material, the power of the band, and the fact that there were these two, ludic frontmen in the tradition of Wynonie Harris or Cab Calloway. It was a formula that worked before for them, and it sure did work for us.
The first album that you released was like, there was a whole concept around it. I mean, you had this whole backstory that you created, and you wrote about it in the liner notes. And so obviously people who know the movie will know that, the backstory that it was Jake and Elwood Blues. They grow up in a Catholic orphanage. They learn blues from a janitor named Curtis. Tell me how you came up with this, just this whole concept on the record. Like, why? First of all, how did you sort of create the story, and why? What was the thinking behind creating a fictional story on this in the liner notes?
Well, Mitch Glazer wrote the liner notes, Miami Mitch, they were pretty gritty. We after the look and the music and the presentation and adopting these characters, recidivists, bad boys from an orphanage, got in trouble, come from Calumet City, that's the steel town. We could sort of build on that myth a bit, and then that's really as far as we had taken it, because we didn't know when that first record came out. We didn't know there was going to be a movie at that point.
You didn't?
No.
That was not part of the vision?
No, not at all, no. But then there was interest from Universal to do the film. And I remember being in Chicago in 1974 when I was with the company with Second City. We'd switched companies. They went up to Toronto. We went down there in 1974. The summer Nixon resigned.
Yep.
Yeah. Now that I've got a lot of time on my hands, come on down to San Clemente Dodge Chrysler. I can get you into a Dodge Diplomat this afternoon. These used cars are beautiful, and I will personally deliver one to your home. We did that the night he resigned. So I remembered that there was an article in the paper about how, the taxes were running out. There was all this free real estate that the church had, and there was a scheme maybe to tax church properties and educational properties owned by the Catholic Church, to put a levy on there. Now, this was one article that came out, but I thought to myself, ooh, separation of church and state. That nobody's going to buy that. That's a bad thing. And so basically, I based the movie on that premise that they were doing this evil thing to the nun that raised us. And so that's where the story kind of originated, from that newspaper article about taxing the church or church assets. No, you can't do that. No, they should today. They should tax. The Vatican should be taxed right now.
When you guys were approached to make a film, from what I understand, you couldn't find a writer, and you had never written a screenplay, so you just kind of said, well, I guess I'll take a crack at it. How did you start? I mean, because from what I read, it was like a massive tome that you wrote. It was like it was like, well,
it was two movies. It was 300 pages, but it was it was the return of the Blues Brothers. So I wrote a script, and then I wrote a sequel to the script, and just kind of all packed it into 150 pages, and then 150 pages, and I combined it and put it in the phone book cover for Burbank. And what I wanted to do was cram everything in there, put everything that the Blues Brothers could be, everything that they could be, and the full breadth of their story and who they knew and where they came from. And I figured, an editing process like anything else creatively, a good editor can come in and make it real and make it producible. And that's what Landis was.
Because you had written, it was almost like a brand Bible. Like you had, from what I had read, like a super detailed, as you mentioned, of the characters, but scenes. And like you had conjured these scenes at the Soul Food Cafe or wherever, the Blues Brothers were going to be. And it wasn't like a clean script. You'd never written one. It wasn't a screenplay format, right? So you handed.
It was it was a screenplay with exterior, interior, paragraph, and all that. It's just the length of it. Screenplays are 120 pages. This was 300. Right. 2 movies in one. It was the length of it, and yes, there was a lot of detail, and there was a lot of scenes that we never shot, like this whole scene where we get the band together in Chicago, and we have to have a place to practice. And we end up going into a subdivision with all these houses that are abandoned. I don't know why they're abandoned, but here's an abandoned house we can practice in. Turns out there's a radioactive spill, so we had the Bluesmobile glowing in that draft. So basically Landis took it, and then he brought it down into the length that would be acceptable to the studio, and then I took it back, and then together we wrote the movie that people see today. Yeah. But he taught me a lot about screenwriting. And I went on to write a few other movies after that. But no, it was formatted, because I'd seen scripts before.
While you were writing some of those scenes, do you remember, would you laugh out loud? I think of the scene in the restaurant where John Belushi's like, sell me your daughters, or, you go to the Soul Food Cafe and Aretha Franklin's your waitress and you say, I want, white toast, dry, some of those scenes are, they're legendary, of course, today. When you were writing them, in your mind, were you laughing? Did you?
Oh yeah, you're going for laughs, and absolutely, you're hoping that if it makes you laugh, then 5 people might, then 50, then 500, and 5,000. So it all starts with yourself just sitting there at that time with a legal pad and pen. And sure, oh no, I was chuckling all the way through, thinking, boy, if we can pull this off, this could be really, really funny. Boy, this character here could really work here, and that's good. Man, it was a dream at the time of writing it, and I'm going, oh boy, this could really, really work, and I'm laughing to myself. And then I turn it in, and Landis saw what needed to be done, and he kept a lot of the stuff, of course. And then when we read the draft, people were laughing, but all of us around the table and all of us who got it, from the executives on down, people saw the joy of it. But a great episode that I heard about was when the original 300 pages was being typed by the Universal Pool. I took my handwritten, and I had it transcribed, and then I took that and gave it to the Universal Pool to duplicate, basically. And Bob Weiss, the producer, said he was in there checking on how the ladies were doing. And he said like 3 or 4 of them were typing different parts of the script, and all of them laughing. All of them were laughing as they were typing. And I heard that. I thought, yep, okay, I was right. Here we go. Yeah.
You, this movie comes out in 1980. It's a pretty big success, and you had
They
written,
made their money back.
obviously-
Yeah, they made their money back.
Obviously, you wrote this part for John Belushi, Jake, and we're trying to sort of channel him as an actor and his voice. And from what I gather, you had thought of him. He was maybe Muse is too strong, but I know you were writing a character for him, a main character for him in Ghostbusters. Not too long after, when you found out that he had died.
I was writing a line for him when I got the call from Bernie Brillstein. I was literally writing a line for this character of John and got the call. Yeah.
I mean, just 2 years after Blues Brothers comes out, there's so much potential. The partnership between the two of you, there's so much energy and chemistry between the two of you, and it was over. I mean,
he was 33, and I was 29, and we had another record planned. We were going to do a sequel to Blues Brothers. We had an FBI a series where we played FBI agents that we were going to do and pitch, and we had all kinds of things planned. He succumbed to what thousands and thousands of people have and are still succumbing to, which is the abuse of synthetic, pharmaceuticals, and now we have fentanyl. And then back then it was coke and heroin and Mandrax and all these these pharmaceutical drugs. And why do people do it? To numb pain. His death was an accident. The woman overdosed him by mistake. So that makes it pretty sad. I think he could have cleaned up, but he was being enabled at the end by a lot of people. Enabled.
Did you? I mean, given how important he was to you as a partner, did you? At the time of his death, had you been in touch with him, or were you kind of
the day before?
Months.
The day before, wow. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, he left me a message, and I said, I called him and I said, come home, man. Let's come back to New York. Come back. Never mind the picture business right now. Let's get things. Let's plan this next record. Let's do more music. Yeah. But I could tell he was impaired when I spoke with him that last time, and also the message he left me the night before, I guess it was, that he died. He was incomprehensible. And I called Judy, and they couldn't find him at that time. He wouldn't answer the phone. I don't know what happened. Yeah, it's happens to millions of people. For me, I just had to keep going. It was a tragedy. My partner dies like that, and so many things we were planning. So I basically retreated back to Canada with old friends and spent the summer up at the old rock pile there, the old family farm, and that was very comforting.
You were writing the script for Ghostbusters, as you mentioned at the time, and meantime, Trading Places comes out, which also became a huge. I mean, I think today it's on every list of top 10 comedies of all time.
It's a Christmas movie.
It's Christmas
movie, that's how it plays now. I can't believe it plays with a wonderful life, and it's now in the Christmas pantheon.
It's
Weird.
It's in the Christmas pantheon, yeah. And just so many memorable lines in that movie, and of course that. Did you? I mean, as you started to, this is the early '80s. You were very famous. You all of a sudden you'd gone from being, I think you were famous on Saturday Night Live, right? People saw you, but this was different. You were in feature films now. How did you, how did you cope with that? I mean, did you like it? Did you like being recognized? Did you like people coming up to you, people asking you if you were from Chicago, whatever they might, people reciting lines to you from the movies that you were in?
7 years before we started writing Blues Brothers, 7 years before that, I was a mail truck driver. So in 7 years, I went from being a mail truck driver to writing and performing in the Blues Brothers. Just 7 years. That's all it took. After that happened, I was wary. I've always been a little wary from my father of comers and, the darker fools and all that. So I was able to protect myself. But, it's not something I basked in, or relished, And as far as people coming up and that, I figure, well, when am I ever going to meet this person again? I'm not going to see them next week or, so they're coming up to me for the first time and last time in their lives and mine probably. Why not make the encounter pleasant? I mean, why? I've been sharp and abrupt sometimes when things are pushed. But usually back then and now, I'm happy to meet people, find out about them, and have the encounter be pleasant. Why not? Yeah.
Dan, while you were working on, I guess part of the inspiration for Ghostbusters came from what I understand came from an article you read in a scientific journal. It was about like parapsychology and quantum physics, and so Ghostbusters was really, and obviously you came from this background, this spiritualist background that involved transmigration and a belief in spirits and seances. So this movie, even though it's a comedy film, like it really does draw on your own life experiences a little bit, right?
Well, it drew first on the research that psychic researchers were doing, and that my great-grandfather did. That article that I read in the American Journal for Psychical Research, that journal was sitting in the old farmhouse, in the old seance room at the lake, and I picked it up one afternoon and read it and thought, wow, this is the real vernacular of a real science, paranormal science. Nevertheless, it's real science. It's real investigative people trying to study these phenomena and find out how they are caused. Take that and marry that with the Abbott and Costello, Bing Crosby, Bob Hope, Dean Martin, Bowery Boys. Marry that with the old ghost comedies of the 30s and 40s. Marry the actual vernacular, the research, the fact that people are really doing this as a profession, and marry it with the old the comedy values of those those guys. And then when I sat down with Harold to
Harold
Ramis to write, he was not a believer or a spiritualist, but he certainly knew about the work of Duke Paranormal Research at the university there. He knew about William Roll, and the cards that were held up. William Roll made playing cards with stars and crosses and for people to practice their ESP. He knew about Zecharia Sitchin. He had great reference to all of the stuff that I'd been reading about for years, even though he was not a believer. He knew about the Maimonides Dream Lab. He knew about all these wonderful areas of psychic research around the world where people were really doing serious inquiry. So married with his knowledge of it, my knowledge of it, and are just clicking with everybody, Ivan and Billy and everybody, on we're going to do an old-time ghost comedy, with a little science thrown in there.
How did you and Harold Ramis work together? I mean, you had this concept and you had this idea for what you wanted, but of course, when somebody else comes in, they are going to put their ideas forward and revise. Was it hard or not hard for you to kind of let your ego, push your ego out of the way and let him also put his stamp on it?
I was happy to have him as a collaborator. He was so smart and so articulate and so intelligent. And as I say, he got my references. He got all of where this was coming from. He said, I get it. So we sat down primarily. We wrote line by line. I would type mainly, and so we wrote line by line, sitting across from a table, and then we did a draft with Ivan Reitman where we wrote in the basement of my house in Martha's Vineyard, down in the basement, because I used to have a beautiful view there, and we didn't want to sit and look at the view. We had to write, so I sequestered us down in the basement, and I wrote it on a Royal Electric typewriter, which became really the start of the shooting draft. So line by line, yeah. We weren't trading pages
Yeah.
I wasn't, in one city, he in another. We were in the same room and doing it the old-fashioned slog through it way.
And I'm curious about the way you work with a collaborator. I mean, do you ever? From everything I've seen of you, every interview I've read of you, you seem like a pretty easygoing person, and not sort of wedded necessarily to one specific vision. Are you? Was it like that, or did you ever have butt heads with Harold Ramis writing this?
There's certain things I believe in, and I'll lobby for them. And then if they're logical, they usually get accepted. If they're not logical and they don't fit into the rules of what we're writing, or they cause a hole in the fabric, or they don't follow in terms of let's say sequence or continuity, or anything like that, of course, I'm not going to fight them if they're going to tell me that I'm wrong in those contexts. But mainly, we agreed pretty much on everything. And if anything, he refined and enhanced what I had come up with immensely.
Out of all the collaborators, people you've worked with, whether John Belushi or Harold Ramis or John Landis or, Chevy Chase. I mean, all of them. Anybody that you've worked with. Can you? Who have you worked with where it just everything really is aligned, where it's so easy out of all of your and why? Why do you think that was?
Well, I think Ivan Reitman as director and John Landis as director. And Bruce Beresford as director on Driving Miss Daisy, and George Armitage on Grosse Pointe Blank.
Do you think it was the personalities, or do you think there was a sort of a creative mind meld that made that work?
I think that strength of material really helps, and then as far as you kind of have to like the person and be fond of the person, as I was with every one of those people that I just mentioned to you, and I'm open to anybody's gifts that are going to make me look better. So I embraced all of the suggestions that these directors came up with, and was thrilled when I would come up with a suggestion and they liked it. So I think it's sort of a cross gratification. You gratify the collaborator, you gratify your partner with understanding and getting what they want to put into the content of the story, and from that usually there's a consensus that is built that works, because you don't go home at the end of the day without a consensus, and you don't get something on screen without a consensus, and it grows from that. Accepting the other person, they accept you, and I can't think of too many arduous writing sessions that I've had. Maybe one on the movie Neighbors with John Avildsen, but that's because we were writing all night to get it under the strike deadline, and that was a tough one because the poor secretary could not understand our scrawling.
What do you? I mean, when you collaborate with other people. Certainly at that time, right? You, by that point, by the time you wrote Ghostbusters, you were already an experienced screenwriter and an experienced sketch writer, right? But were there things that, for example, Harold Ramis brought to the table that you where he was a bit stronger on, or things that you were a bit stronger on? I don't know, like dialogue or concepts or character building.
Well, certainly, he understood, structure, maybe in that sense, structure and the concept of having, if you're in a screenplay, you're writing a screenplay, you don't know what the next scene's going to be, but you write a scene anyway as a bookmark and come back to it.
Yeah.
That was a technique I learned from him. Wow. And just the concept of the fact that a movie you can't rave for the first 47 minutes of the movie and accelerate the audience to such a pace and keep going. You have to stop. Everything, the action, all of it has to stop and slow down. It's like the movie's got to take the pace of the film has to take a breath and just sit back and just take a breath, take perspective, then you're off again into Act 2 and then on to Act 3. So certainly the films we wrote together, the first two movies, the Ghostbusters movies, had those elements at work in there. Yeah.
You were pretty much known as a comedic actor, and you had a couple of cameos in films that weren't necessarily comedies, like an Indiana Jones movie, but really that big turn was Driving Miss Daisy, where you were in a drama, and you were not playing a funny character. Tell me a little bit about that role and how that happened. I mean, I think that was the first time people saw you in a non-comedic role, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was, the movie was, it's sort of, it had a lightness to it and a sweetness to it. So it wasn't, I wasn't playing a serial killer. So I was able to acquit myself there. And basically I'd had read about the play being a hit on Broadway. I never saw it, but I heard it was a big hit and that they were considering a number of actors for the part. And I basically called my agent and said, I think I might be able to do this, get me a reading. And so he got me a reading with Bruce Beresford and Dick Zanuck. And I went in and I read with Bruce and read a scene, another scene. And right in front of me, they both looked at each other and went, well, he's got the accent. He could be a nice Jewish Southern boy. Yeah. They went, yeah. They both went, yeah. And I, of course, was silent. And, okay, thank you, Dan. We'll call you. And I walked out. I thought, I think I got that. Because they decided in front of me. And then I had a wonderful experience. It was just beautiful working with Jessica Tandy, of course, and Morgan. And Bruce, who's so sweet and talented and wonderful. And Alfred Urey, a doll, who wrote the play and the film based upon his grandmother. And, the Jewish community growing up in the South. And, the birth of the civil rights and her involvement in it, witnessing and seeing really the new way that Southern whites had to see back then. It was a beautiful script, yeah.
What was it about? I mean, because you went on to do My Girl, also a serious role. And I imagine that part of you, I guess, as an actor, like you needed to, that was a way for you to sort of challenge yourself, right? And maybe, I don't know, maybe get out of your comfort zone. I'm curious to how you thought about it. I was thinking,
because I read about the part on Broadway. I read about the age of the guy, and I thought, this could basically was just seeking work, really. And I thought I can pull this off. I wasn't really trying to stretch or get out of the comedy zone. I just saw a part that I thought I could play. So that was that.
Yeah.
My Girl came about through Donna's agent.
This is your wife, Donna Dixon.
Donna Dixon Aykroyd, yeah. Came from her agent, Elaine Rich, who said, there's this beautiful script I just saw, and they're setting it up at Sony. Really, really good part in there, and so I called up and pitched my name, and they said, yeah, sure. And Jamie Lee was hired, and then Howard Zief, and my own agents didn't even get me that job. Donna's agent got me that job, or turned me on to it, So we had Elaine Rich to thank, and she was a wonderful veteran agent there. She's passed now, but she was great. She was great. So, and we did 2 of those movies, and they were very big commercial hits, those films. And they still play now, of course, like everywhere.
Yeah.
And working with Jamie twice, got to do that's the third movie we did. So after the two of them.
And I think you guys are very close.
Well, I
you and
consider
Jamie
her
Lee Curtis.
my sister in the business, yeah.
Yeah.
No, she's spectacular. Well, anyone who knows her will tell you what a superior individual she is.
Yeah. And an incredible actor.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about a completely different part of your career, which is sort of like as an entrepreneur. I mean, you co-founded House of Blues, which became a huge, massive music venue. It still is. It was sold to Live Nation, I think, in 2006, and then also you founded a vodka brand in 2007. Let's talk about House of Blues first. I mean, this is like this became a huge venue, worldwide phenomenon. You know, rock albums were recorded there. You know, so and so live at the House of Blues. Tell me about the genesis of that whole project.
Well, that came out of Isaac Tigert, who had started the Hard Rock. We had met after John died. I flew to England the weekend I buried him, and Isaac Tigert, in a big black Daimler with a bucket of champagne, met me at the airport, and he was introduced to me by Larry Bilzerian, our good friend that John and I had on the vineyard, and Larry said, well, this is a gentleman who's lost two brothers, and so you've just lost a brother. I think he could help you. And Isaac and I became great friends. He had started the Hard Rock, and after John had died, and after all that, after about, I don't know, it was a year or so later, he said, the Blues Brothers, it's too good a brand to let go dormant.
Yeah.
You know, and you and John have this image of supporting this music and this culture. You know, we're going to open a chain of nightclubs. And by God, he put it together. We started in Cambridge with the first one.
Cambridge, Massachusetts.
The little one there
Square.
in Harvard Square.
Yeah.
And then right next door to us was the Harvard Endowment Fund, one of their offices. And those guys used to come over and have beers and burgers and listen to music. And they became one of our first investors. And then the whole thing was built out. We got really hurt badly by the Atlanta event when Alan Rudolph put a bomb there in the park. We had a beautiful venue set up in the Tabernacle.
I think it was Eric Rudolph, wasn't it?
I don't know. Alan Rudolph is.
Yeah,
I think that's
the
a
guy,
director.
This is the guy.
I don't
who
know. Yeah,
is
the dumpster diver.
is
Anyway.
This is in '96 during
And
the
so
Atlanta
what
Olympics.
happened was
Yeah.
we got knocked out of a week of business, and it really, really hurt us.
Wow.
And from there, the places were still built out. There's still 11 of them, but in the end, we just needed a bigger partner. We needed someone to absorb it and save it. And Live Nation stepped in and took it over. Basically to save 3,000 employees and save all those wonderful venues. And now it's like a training center for their staff. Also, a wonderful live venue, still alive in Boston, Cleveland, Chicago, Las Vegas, Anaheim, California, San Diego, Houston, Dallas, New Orleans, Orlando, Myrtle Beach. They're still there. And they're all wonderful palaces. And it was Dr. Tigert, his inspiration in celebrating the African-American culture, the rural folk art, the Southern American cuisine, beautiful technical facilities that the artists would love, with dressing rooms that they like going back to, not a sleazy back green room. Treat the artists right. This was Isaac's philosophy, and that company today and all those venues I mentioned still operates upon that ethos. Yeah.
Yeah. You also, you were really involved in promoting it. I think even though you're not involved in the company today, you still are. You still go to venues and promote.
Well, I was
right?
a shareholder investor prior to the Live Nation sale. And I'm the only guy who can show up in town, do a charity motorcycle ride, do all their press and electronics, and go on and do a host and perform in a blues and R&B review. So they kind of, when they open new venues, and I hope they do soon, another one, we're looking at Nashville. I'm a founding consultant for the company, nothing more than that.
Yeah.
But, I'm the guy they're going to call to help out, so I'm happy to do it. And I visit whenever I missed the one in L.A. That was beautiful, man. I miss that. And whenever I'm in one of the towns I mentioned, I definitely drop in and do some heavy tipping.
And tell me about the vodka brand. Did you get into that? I guess there's two questions here. One is, Did you seek? Did you want to become an entrepreneur? Was that something that you kind of aspired to do? No.
Not really. You know, I had and have a very full life, and it's not something I needed or wanted to do, other than the fact that I do enjoy in moderation an alcoholic beverage from time to time. And I wanted to get a nice tequila in Canada because we only had 2 brands up here, and they were kind of cheaper brands. And I like having a margarita dockside at the lake in the summer.
Yeah.
And so I discovered Patron Tequila when at the House of Blues in L.A. one night. J.P. DeJoria, one of our investors and founders of House of Blues and the owner of Patron Tequila, poured me a shot of this beautiful, silky, smoky tequila. And I thought, JP, how can I get it into my little government liquor store up in the village I live in Canada? He said, well, Dan, you'd have to bring it to the whole country. And we did. So JP gave me the importing rights to bring Patron into Canada. I learned about the beverage alcohol business through that. They've sold it to Bacardi now, so I'm no longer involved. But, you know, I thought it's a fun business. And now we grew that brand. That's 10% of luxury tequila sales in Canada are now Patron, and it's nationally represented. We got it in all the stores. We really launched them beautifully in Canada. And so it's going to be, you know, an interesting business. Had a lot of fun doing that. And then I was looking at other categories thinking, well, you know, that was a success until Bacardi bought them out, and I had ended that association. I thought, well, you know, what else? What's the biggest category out there? So vodka, believe it or not, is a $50 billion worldwide category.
Wow.
And I thought, well, if I'm going to do something, I want to have half a shot at success. If I could get a sliver of that market. But what about vodka? So I started to taste vodkas and smell them and try them straight, warm, on ice, in cocktails. And I found, and I don't name names, but I opened up some leading brands. And they either smelt like nothing, or they smelt like perfumey, or they were rough on the tongue like a cat's tongue. And I thought, or they were over viscous and oily. And I thought, why, you know, where's the old clean, pure spirit of old? And I come to find out that many brands, they don't put enough of this stuff in these beverages to kill you, but they do it to mask the alcohol smell, the good, clean alcohol scent that you should get with proper distillation and water, and the scent and the taste. Many manufacturers add the following substances: limonene, glyceride, and sugar. Limonene to make it viscous, glyceride to mask the taste and the scent of the alcohol, and sugar to make it sweet. Now, you don't need enough. You don't need sugar in ethyl alcohol. There's enough there. And I said, well, what if we stripped all those oils out of there and didn't do that? What would you have?
Yeah.
And now we have an award-winning vodka that comes in a skull. We don't have any additives, no masking oils. We are a sustainable company. We work with glass manufacturers that run their operations in a clean environmental way. We manufacture at a government facility in Newfoundland, Canada. The Newfoundland Liquor Distillery Board makes our product with beautiful Newfoundland water, very clean and hygienic. A lot of stills in, you know, Balkan countries ain't so hygienic, but ours is, you know, clean. And we put it in this vessel that can only say, excuse me, here we are. We put it in a vessel that can only say purity.
Wow.
Purity. How could I put a polluted vodka in this beautiful smiling skull? Look at that glass skull. Yeah, so no limonene, no glyceride, no sugar. Our notes are sweet vanilla, dry and crisp. We make a wheat vodka that is dry. Anise, peppercorn are the notes on that. And we also make an agave vodka made out of what they make tequila out of. It comes in a black skull.
Yeah.
And our notes on that are long and earthy. So it's been really, really fun. And it's a hit in 78 countries. We've been in business 17 years, never had to go into our line of credit, and self-sustaining. Wow. And so we sort of cleaned up the category there. And we don't use any additives at all, and we try to be as green as we can in our footprint. A lot of people are into clean drinking and clean thinking. We were there from the very beginning. We had a good, clean vodka to offer the consumer. We didn't come to it. We manufactured it and originated it.
Any plans to sell it? I mean, George Clooney made a ton of money.
Well,
selling,
now he's George
tequila.
Clooney, and Ryan Reynolds is Ryan Reynolds, and I'm who I am. I think their celebrity certainly helps there, but whoever bought Crystal Head, should we ever look at that, would probably they'd make with like if a big company came in that has a sales force like more than we have now, we if you came in with 30 to 50 salespeople, you could make your money back in about 3 years if you bought us, and that's what we need.
Right.
To really blow it up into a super brand. It's a fine brand now. It's successful. We have other things coming. But to take it to the next step, we'd probably have to take a partner on like that. And if a partner like that emerged, they would take a look at our books and see that with the proper staff and resources and growth, a growth platform funded by their resources, they'd make their money back 3 years, easy, and that's a 9-figure purchase there. That would be. So they'd make that back because of the solidity of the product, because of our built-in relationships. We just need more boots in the ground. That's how these super brands are made. More boots in the ground. They sold. Ryan sold Aviation Gin, very good product, very nice, and of course Casamigos, great tequila. They sold that, but right now they're salesmen pounding the street to keep those cases moving. George is helping and Ryan's helping, but you can't take your eyes off the business for a second. You have to have people advocating. And our brand is no different from those big celebrity brands.
I want to get back to movies for a second and talk to you about Ghostbusters, because obviously that's a hugely successful franchise, and you were involved in executive producing and even appearing in the 2016 release of that film. We had Paul Feig on the show last season, who was obviously a co-writer and director. That film, it was just became a target of trolls, and it there was all this manufactured controversy around it. How did you feel? How did you react or respond to that when you first started to see, I don't know, some of the kind of misogynistic attacks?
Well, these are ignorant people who, obviously, are, detrimental to our society, that they even exist. But they do, and they exist in droves, and they follow their gods. I was most distressed because I liked the picture. I thought it was really good. I thought the ladies were great. I loved the big villain at the end. I liked so much of it. I really liked it all. I did. I was upset that it costs more than it should have. As a producer, I should have been more diligent there. And I was I was mad at Paul for a minute for maybe spending on some sequences that he ended up not using or didn't work. But you have to trust the director and the creator. You got to give them, full support. Let them be right, let them be wrong, and now I realize that. But in the end, I liked that movie. I was in it, and I think it's a great part of the DVD collection for all the Ghostbusters movies, and I'm glad that it's in there in the series. Really, I think it fits in beautifully, and that they did a great job. Love those ladies. Yeah.
Do you see yourself? You are in you've been reunited with Chevy Chase in a zombie film, Zombie Town, and you're
R.L. Stein's.
You're still Yes, you're still acting, and you're not. You've still got a lot of acting and life ahead of you. Tell me a little bit about how you kind of see this next phase of your life and career playing out. Do you want to continue to be in lots of films? Do you want to continue to start brands? Do you want to continue to play music? Do you want to continue to be behind the scenes? All of the above?
I would not so much want to be chasing the acting anymore. I will. I'm in the new Ghostbusters film that's coming out, the sequel to the Firehouse, to the Afterlife movie. They're calling it Firehouse right now, but that may change. I enjoy doing that because had fun in that character, and it's something that I wrote and originated. So I love doing that part. The Zombie Town, I love R.L. Stine, and to work with Chevy again, that was just a joy. And to work in Canada, too. I wanted to encourage production up here in Ontario, so that got me out the door there. So Ghostbusters got me out the door on the one job. The R.L. Stine and working in Canada and Chevy got me out the door on the other. But other than that, it would have to be a Spielberg call to really get me out the door for acting now. What I want to do is continue to play music with Jimmy. We have a terrific band.
This is Jim Belushi, John Belushi.
We have the
brother.
Blues Brothers Formal Classic Review featuring the Legacy and the Blood, and that is really fun. I want to do that. And I am actively involved in managing and consulting with my 3 partners on the Vodka. And so I will be traveling with that and advocating for it and meeting all of our loyal friends that have been with us through the journey and going back and going over some territory that I need to, opening up new markets. And that is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, that business. I can consume alcohol moderately, so I'm lucky that way. There's some who can't, but and I'm very careful about the way we sell it. We don't go to spring break. We don't have a skull wagon down there selling shots on the beach at Corpus Christi or down in Destin to teenagers. No, if you look, you got to be 25 to 85 to buy it. This bottle's expensive. It's $100, and then our other one's 60, and because they're getting a great package, which people do all kinds of things with. World Wide Web, crystalheadvodka.com. You get on there and you see the many, many things that artists have done with the product. So John Alexander, my good friend, the artist, designed the bottle. I'm a writer, actor, artist. So it's really an artist's brand and an artist's company, Crystal Head.
Yeah.
And that's something to like about it, other than the tasting notes and the fun that you can have with 20 people in one of these.
So, I mean, when people come up to you and talk to you about, older films like Trading Places or Ghostbusters or the Blues Brothers, do you like talking about that?
Yeah.
Do you feel...
Sure. Yeah. Well, especially those two. Some others I might not mention, or other ones I'll deny doing them, but no, those two for sure. Yeah.
But you feel like at this phase in your life, acting, being in films, occasionally, if there's an interesting opportunity.
It's got to be the Spielberg call. It really does. It's got to be Steven calls and says, "I want you to be abducted by an alien ship." That then I'm out the door, and I'll pay my own way. And he doesn't have, and he doesn't have to pay me.
Yeah. I'm curious, why is that? I mean, we've had actors on like Sigourney Weaver and Andy Garcia who are they're looking at the future of their lives and they don't want to stop, and that's fine.
They're
great.
like real actors. They're trained and they went to school and they're like real. Those two. I mean, they're like they could handle anything on stage. I backed into this thing and. I'd like to do more writing. I've always got something cooking. And someday, that might get another one made. So I kind of keep that skill up. Yeah.
Out of sort of all of the people, I think there was in Rolling Stone magazine came out with a list of like the 140, ranking all the SNL actors, and you were number 5. It was like, an amazing list of just people. I think Gilda Radner was number 1 on that list. When you think about all of the people that you worked with, who now, when you were 20, nobody knew that Gilda Radner or Eugene Levy or John Belushi would become legendary comedy actors. But all this cohort of people that you knew from the time you were a kid really defined comedy certainly in the United States, for generations. Do you, first of all, are there people who, of course, some of them are no longer with us, but do you stay in touch with some of that some of that crew?
Murray mainly. Murray and then Chevy we saw last year when we did the movie. Lorraine I see in L.A. from time to time. Jane, I saw her a little while ago. I'm always happy to see anybody from that time. But, primarily Murray and I have sort of kept in touch. Yeah.
When you are, let's say, and this is a long time from now, but when you're long gone, right? What do you want people to remember about you or to say about you?
Well, the work will speak for itself, the good and the bad. So they can enjoy that or not. I think I'd like to be remembered for the fact that in the end, I really began to listen and see people instead of just absorbing information and absorbing a contact and then moving on. I'd like to be remembered as someone who, in the end, realized that you got to really connect with people and see people and listen. That I listened more. And that's what I'm trying to do right now in my life is listen more, and not interrupt and not talk as much, and really try to see people deeper than I might have a few years ago. So in the last few years, I've been trying to focus on that and really connect with humankind because we're all linked. And so in my encounters with people briefly or at length, I hope that it said that, he listened to me and he heard what I had to say.
Amazing. Well, Dan, thank you so much for doing this. That's Dan Aykroyd. His newest film, Zombie Town, came out in September of 2023. You can find clips from Dan's career at our website, thegreatcreators.com/Aykroyd. And if you want to learn about Dan's Crystal Head Vodka Company, we'll link to it there. Please make sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss any of my conversations with these amazing people from Bjork to Tom Hanks. And if you want to hear our podcast, look for The Great Creators wherever you listen to podcasts and make sure to click the follow button. I'm Guy.raz, and we'll be back here in a week with another conversation. Thanks for watching.